Hello, everybody. Hope you all are doing well and studying properly at home. Today, we are starting with the first unit of your 12th standard biology syllabus, that is reproduction. This unit includes around 4 lessons. The first lesson is related to basic concepts, that is entitled as reproduction in organisms. The second chapter, it is related to sexual reproduction in flowering plants. The third chapter, human reproduction. And the fourth chapter, reproductive health. So today we are starting with the chapter number 1, that is reproduction in organisms. Students, इस लेसन में काफी सारे कंसेप्ट्स ऐसे हैं जो आपने ऑलरेडी पढ़े हुए हैं. शायद आपके 9th और 10th स्टैंडर्ड के सिलेबस में ये आपको पढ़ाया गया होगा. तो आपको ये काफ़ी आसान लेसन लगेगा, काफ़ी आसान चैप्टर लगेगा. लेकिन कुछ कंसेप्ट्स है इसमें जो कि बहुत ज़रूरी है और इन्हीं कंसेप्ट्स के बेस पे आपको आगे के जो 3 लेसन हैं वो समझने में आसानी होगी. इस चैप्टर में बेसिकली 3 अलग-अलग एस्पेक्ट्स पे हम स्टडी करने वाले हैं. द फर्स्ट एस्पेक्ट, इट इज़ रिलेटेड टू लाइफ स्पैन एंड लाइफ साइकिल, which is commonly observed in every living organism. The second aspect, it is related to types of reproduction. And the third aspect, it is related to understanding this different types of reproductions in detailed manner with key examples. तो इस तरह से हम ये तीनों भी aspects इस लेसन में कवर करेंगे. ठीक है? So let us begin with the first part, that is related to lifespan and life cycle. So we know that every living organism on earth remain alive for a limited period of time. They grow old and then ultimately they die. Very harsh reality, right? In spite of this harsh reality, huge number of plants and animal species have existed on earth for several thousand years. It means that there must be some process that ensure the production of new organisms in place of those that are dying, right? So this pattern, it is common for every living organism, and we can learn this pattern by observing certain stages of their life. So let us try to understand this in detailed manner. Any living organism, it begins its life with a birth or hatching process or a germination process. After birth, hatching or germination, they start developing all the morphological and physiological characteristics related to those species, which we usually consider in terms of growth. After attaining proper growth, they enter in maturation phase. Now, this maturation phase is something related to getting the ability to reproduce. And after completing the reproduction process, those organisms advance towards natural death process. So these steps usually we consider as life cycle. So all the stages, birth, growth, maturation, reproduction, and death, we consider them as a part of life cycle of every organism. Why to call it a life cycle? We know it is a cyclic process which begins with the birth and ends with the death. But in between, these organisms which are reproducing, they are producing next generation which is going to survive on earth. So that next generation after birth again going to follow the same pattern of stages. And that's why these stages together are considered as life cycle of organisms. Let us look into few examples of life cycle. So here I have included 3 examples. पहला जो example है वो plant का है. Plants, particularly here we are talking about flowering plants, right? So in angiosperms, The life cycle, it begins with the seed. So that seed enters into germination process, which is something called birth and hatching in case of animals. During germination, it produces its two important morphological parts, that is the below ground root structure, so that is radical, the immature root, and above ground shoot structure, which is also called as plumule for immature or initial shoot emerging from the seed. Then this plant, it grows up, it increases in height, it develops lots of leaves, it develops branching, and it keep growing large and large. Ultimately, after certain time, it will develop inflorescence. It will enter into inflorescence stage where there are several flowers emerging onto the shoot part. As soon as it starts developing inflorescence, we consider that the plant is entering into maturation phase. And that's how it is becoming able to reproduce. So once the flowers are produced, these flowers include those parts which can produce the essential cells called gametes for reproduction, sexual reproduction particularly. So this flower, it is getting mature enough, it is following the reproduction, sexual reproduction, and then this flowers will have same types of seeds which are serving as a starting material for the next generation. And meanwhile, after completing this process, the plant is going to follow the death phase, right? So seed germination, germination to growth, growth, then maturation, that is reproductive maturation, and then formation of seeds. So this process keeps going on endlessly until and unless the new organisms or new generations which are produced by this manner are able to reproduce. So they continuously give rise to new generations, and on each of these new generations they follow the same pattern of life cycle. The second example here is of insect life cycle. They are egg laying animals, right? So in insects, when the egg get mature, it hatches and a larva come out. This larva is not able to reproduce. It is reproductively immature stage of life. These larvae, they start the growth phase. They keep growing and turn into second stage larva, या फिर इसको second instar larva भी बोल सकते हैं. Then they grow more and they reach the third instar larval stage. Now, during this first instar to this second instar and third instar stage, the larvae are not able to reproduce. They're not having reproductive system developed. Even after this third instar larval stage, they enters into pupa phase. This pupa phase is very important so that this reproductively unable larvae can become reproductively able by getting converted into an adult fly. So conversion of a larva to adult, it is followed by a pupal stage, right? So once the pupa is matured enough, it turns into adult fly, and this adult fly now able to reproduce and again laying eggs. Eggs hatching into larva. This larva is getting mature, turning into pupa. Again, the pupa hatches in the form of adult. Again, this adult is laying eggs. So the process is continuously going on, right? This life cycle, it is a continuously on. And these adults of every generation, they are going to follow the natural death process. So they will die, right? So as they are giving rise to new generation, ultimately they are dying. The third life cycle is very familiar to us, that is human life cycle. So in humans, the newborn baby, they follow a childhood stage up to 10 years or 11 years of span. From childhood, they enter after almost after 11 years of age, they enter into the next phase called adolescence phase. So childhood phase and adolescence phase, they are mainly referring the growth and maturation phase. Childhood phase, we can observe the maximum growth of the child, and during adolescence, under the effect of various hormones, this individual is attaining reproductive maturity. And once it attains the reproductive maturity, it enters into next stage called adult stage. And now these adults, they are reproductively mature. They can produce this gametes. So once the gametes are formed, gametes can fertilize and again can give rise to new individual. So that's how in humans also the same steps are followed right from their birth to their next generation. So meanwhile, these two parents, two adults, after certain age, they are following the death cycle, and that's how there is end of life. So in this three example, it is very clear that every living organism which is getting born, it is going to die, right? And meanwhile, they are following a certain process which is efficient enough that it can give rise to the next generation of their own kind, right? Now, next concept, it is related to lifespan. So lifespan is very easy to understand. In fact, lifespan is nothing but it is the period from birth to natural death, right? This natural death word is very important because we are not going to consider the accidental death as a part of lifespan or as an estimate of lifespan, right? So lifespan simply can be defined as the period from birth to natural death. Now, in every living organism, this lifespan is considered to be a specific trait. So, what it means by a specific trait? As we know that during the process of evolution, every living organism has got separated from each other by getting certain specific characteristics, right? So during classification also you might have learned that while we are classifying the organism, we consider both the similarities and differences. Similarities to group them together and the differences to separate them apart. So lifespan is one of such trait which is very specific for individual species. There is no correlation of lifespan with the size and complexity of the organism. Now this is very important part. Usually, while estimating or guessing a lifespan of any living organism, it is natural that we might have considered their size and structural complexity. But that is not true. That should not be considered. Why? So let us consider one example for this. The bullfrog and lion are two different individuals belonging to two different species. Bullfrog, it is an amphibian. Lion belongs to mammals. There is huge variation in their size. There is huge variation in their morphological characteristics. But still, both of these organisms have the same lifespan. That is 30 years. So we should not consider the size and complexity. We should not give weightage for these two criterias while estimating lifespan of any living organism. It is not related to it, right? We will consider more examples in later part. Now let us start with the several examples of organisms and their respective lifespans. So the shortest living animal on earth, it is a mayfly, which is an insect and having lifespan of around 1 day or 24 hours. During this 1 day, these mayflies, they are completing the period or stages from birth to natural death. It means they are getting hatched. After getting hatched, they are entering into larval stages as it is an insect. After larval stage, it will turn into pupa, and this pupa ultimately turn into an adult. So this adult will again lay down eggs and they will die. So from eggs, again there is hatching, larval stage, pupal stage, adult, eggs, and again the adult is dying. So all these stages, they are followed merely within 24 hours of time. Next example, it is of butterfly belonging to the same group, having lifespan of around 1 to 2 weeks. The fruit flies, also known as Drosophila melanogaster, they are having lifespan of around 30 days or 4 weeks. The crows are having 15 years of lifespan. Parrot, which are also birds, having lifespan of around 140 years. So see, again one more example to understand why we should not correlate between the size and complexity. Here, the crow and parrot both belongs to the same group, that is birds, but still having huge variation in their lifespan. Cow is having 20 to 25 years of lifespan. The horse has got 60 years of lifespan. Crocodile, 60 years of lifespan. Tortoise, 100 to 150 years of lifespan. So here also, crocodile and tortoise belongs to same group, reptiles, right? They both are reptiles, but still having huge difference in their lifespan. Dog having lifespan of around 25 to 30 years. The elephant, the largest terrestrial creature, is having lifespan of 60 to 90 years. So tortoise and elephant, if we do the size comparison, there is a huge difference. Still, the tortoise being smaller, having more lifespan, elephant being larger, having less lifespan than the tortoise. So the ultimate conclusion is we should not correlate the size and complexity of organism while estimating its lifespan. Rose plant is having lifespan of around 5 to 7 years. The banana tree is having lifespan of around 25 years. Rice plant has got lifespan of around 3 to 4 years. Banyan tree has got lifespan of around 200 to 300 years. In plant kingdom, in fact, there are many species, mostly belonging to gymnosperms, having lifespan of thousands of years. For example, redwood tree, they have got lifespan of more than 4,000 years. The pine trees, which are mainly observed in the regions of Himalaya and Uttarakhand, having average lifespan of around 900 to 1,000 years. Even in angiosperms, the trees like peepal tree or mango tree also have got their lifespan somewhere around in hundreds of years. So plants has got a huge variation, huge diversity in their lifespan. So that's it about the lifespan concept. Now we are moving on to the main aspect of this lesson, that is reproduction. So as I said earlier, every living organism, whichever is getting born onto the earth, they are definitely going to die. But before they are dying, they are following a biological process which is making them able to produce a new generation of organisms of their own kind. And that is simply a definition of reproduction. So reproduction can be defined as an ability of living organism to produce a new generation of living individuals similar to themselves. This is a very simplest form of definition. Reproduction is a fundamental feature of all known life forms onto the earth. And that's why whatever living organisms we are observing around us, they are still existing as they are following the reproduction. But this should not be mistaken as it is essential process for living. We will understand this more precisely. Let us consider the example of mules or the male honeybees present in honeybee hives. Both of these are not able to reproduce, but because of this inability, their survival is not affected. They live normal life, right? So that's why the reproduction is also considered as non-vital life process. Non-vital means it is not essential for livingness. It is not essential to remain alive. On the other side, if I consider respiration, so respiration is nothing but a process where there is an exchange of gases, atmospheric gases between the atmosphere and the organism. So if respiration is hampered in any living creature, that individual is not able to live anymore. So respiration, vital process, very essential to live. But reproduction, not that essential. So without following reproduction also one can lead to normal life. But the only problem with this, that species will discontinue, right? So putting this all together, we can say that reproduction, which is a fundamental feature of all living organism, it is a crucial process for continuity of species onto the earth. Reproduction enables the continuity of the species. So as I said, this process is crucial for the continuity of every species onto the earth. Now, during the process of reproduction, every parental organism is transferring the genetic material, which is a sort of information to build up the next generation. And this transmission of genetic material mainly decides the blueprint of all living organisms, all living species, their similarities as well as their differences. Now, I want you to recall that concept of lifespan, where I said in every species of living organism, the lifespan is a specific characteristic. It is a species specific characteristic. So, why it is so? It is so because every living organism transmitting its genetic material from generations to generations. And it is this genetic material which is responsible for deciding the lifespan of all the living organisms, provided that all the environmental conditions are normal. Now, there is this concept of genetic variation is very crucial. As I just said, every living organism, while reproducing, transmit its genetic material to next generation. But this transmission is not always in as usual form. It means during this process, there are some possibilities that some changes in this genetic material may arise, and these changes will be reflected into the next generation. And that's why the next generations are not 100% similar to their parental generations. This is called genetic variation. So, how it is important? We know that the process of evolution is responsible for all the diversified living organisms we find in surroundings. So, the evolution has started with a single cell organism raised onto Earth somewhere before around 4 billion years. And that was a very simplest form of life. This unicellular organism has gradually got changed. As these gradual changes have aggregated, they made this organism totally different from where it has started. Now, this changes again aggregated for many million years. So gradually, after every process of genetic variation during reproduction, it has resulted in formation of different individuals than their original species, and that's how a new species are formed. So formation of this new species is mainly the aspect of genetic variation, and that's why genetic variation, which is happening during the process of reproduction, is very crucial for evolution. Organisms have evolved with two main types of reproduction. So whatever living organisms we observe around us, right from the unicellular to multicellular, they all are having either of these two or both mode of reproduction, the asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. Of course, which organism will follow which type of reproduction? It depends on multiple factors. Usually, we consider these factors as internal or external. So, internal factors mainly related to genetic and their physiology, while the external factors, they are environmental factors. They are also deciding the way of reproduction being followed by certain types of species. Now, let us understand the key differences between asexual and sexual reproduction. The asexual reproduction is always uniparental, but sexual reproduction may have both possibilities. In some cases, the sexual reproduction is uniparental, while in some others, it is biparental. Biparental means there is a requirement of two individuals to give rise to next generation. Next difference, in asexual reproduction type, the gametes may or may not involved. Means usually in most of the cases, gametes are not involved or gametes are not having no role during the asexual reproduction. But there are few exceptions, mostly in plants and in few animals, where the gametes also have an ability to participate in asexual reproduction. So that's why we'll write it as the gametes may or may not be involved. However, whenever the gametes are involved in asexual reproduction, they do not follow fertilization. So whenever there is no fertilization, there is no zygote formation. For sexual reproduction, gametes are compulsorily required. So gametes are involved, and whenever gametes are compulsorily required, this gametes needs to go through a step called fertilization, and ultimately the zygote is formed. Now, as far as cell division is concerned, in all those individuals which are following asexual reproduction, they follow mitotic cell division. But in sexually reproducing organism, as the gametes are compulsorily required, the process of cell division is meiosis, because it is the meiosis which is resulting in formation of gametic cells from somatic cell, from diploid cell to haploid cell. So in asexual reproduction, mitosis is followed, while in sexual reproduction, meiosis is followed. As in asexually reproducing organisms, they are following mitotic cell division. There is no event or there is no possibility of crossing over. So there is no recombination. So if there is no recombination, or in other words, if there is no genetic variation, all the offsprings, all the individuals of next generation, they are identical to each other, as well as they are identical to their parents. But in case of sexually reproducing organism, as the gamete formation process is followed by meiosis, the meiosis is having a crossing over stage, phase 1. During this crossing over process, there is an exchange of genetic material between homologous chromosomes, and that leads to certain types of recombinations. Due to these recombinations, genetic variation arises, and that's why all the offsprings which are resulting by this sexual reproduction process, they are not identical except homozygotic twins. So these are the four important differences you need to remember for asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. So a quick review, whatever characters we have learned so far now, a quick review of those characteristics. So asexual reproduction, always uniparental. Asexual reproduction occurs with or without gamete formation, but whenever there are gametes are involved, there is no fertilization. So gamete fusion is absent. The individuals which are produced by the asexual reproduction way, they are exact copies or identical copies of each other, as well as their parents. They are identical copies of their parents. It is because the mitosis cell division is followed during asexual reproduction, and that's why there is no genetic variation. Asexual reproduction can occur through unspecialized or specialized parts of the organism. So any plant or animal, whichever is following this asexual reproduction, they have certain regions in their body, in their structure, which may be specialized structures like gemmules or birds, or unspecialized parts which are participating in this asexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction is very simple process as it do not include the meiosis or crossing over events or gamete formation or fertilization or zygote formation. So it's very simple and quick. And because of its simple and quick nature, it is possible to produce large number of offsprings by asexual reproduction. Now, we will understand the types of asexual reproduction. Now, slowly we are moving on to the third aspect of this lesson, where we will study different types of reproduction and we understand them by citing key examples of various living organisms. So, there are mainly 5 types of asexual reproduction. The fission, which can be of either binary or multiple type, budding process, fragmentation and or regeneration. Usually fragmentation is referred in algal groups, while the regeneration is the term used for animals. Sporulation, mainly observed in fungi, and vegetative reproduction or vegetative propagation, which is a unique characteristic observed in higher plants. So, these 5 types of asexual reproduction, their characteristics, and important examples we will learn into next session. So till then, goodbye.